we are talking about Veterans Day experiences, or as I used to say, it used to be Armistice Day in the older days. And is there any bigger date in U.S. History, certainly in the military sense, than December 7th, 1941, which was the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese on the U.S. fleet? And we have a Berlin resident, who was a resident at that time and still is, Bill Sherman, now from Pleasant Street, who was actually there at the time. And Bill, let's just start. What ship were you on at the time this occurred?
I was on the New Orleans, a heavy cruiser.
Which was a heavy cruiser. And you were actually, the ship was on that morning or that day at that time of period was actually docked, anchored at, what would you call it? Was that called?
We were tied up alongside a dock, side of the heavy cruiser San Francisco.
Okay. And you were performing what duties on that ship?
I was on the 8-inch guns.
Okay, so you were did they have gunner's mates? Is that what they used to call them?
Oh yeah, they had the gunner's mates, and they had the first loaders, second loaders, and all the powder handlers.
So you had been in port how long before December 7th? Were you there a while? Or?
We'd been there about a week. We came back from having a major overhaul in San Francisco, and they had problems aboard ship that someone did something to our turbines, and we couldn't even move. We were tied up at the dock with no water, electricity.
When that morning came about, which was a Sunday morning for those old enough to remember, as you said, you were in the chow line, the breakfast line.
Yes.
Had there been any warning from your standpoint? Was there any feeling on the members of the ship that maybe something was happening, or was that just not known to anybody?
No, there was no word at all. We would start in 3-section Liberty that day, or Saturday the day before.
Which means everybody...
3 out of 4 men could go ashore, which they never even did in the States. But they were allowing us that for Christmas.
Now, as you say, you were in that chow line. What was on the menu that one? You remember? Typically what you get in the Navy 1941 chow line?
I missed it, but I was glad. They had boiled eggs and I think hash, but the boiled eggs were only one-minute jobs, so you didn't want them.
They were pretty loose and wet.
Oh, bad.
So you were either getting ready, and what was your first recollection that something was happening and something going wrong?
You heard the planes, and then you heard the explosions around in the different area. You couldn't see too far, but then all of a sudden general alarm sounded, and we took off for our battle station. But there was such a problem. When you were in port, they had all the awnings over the guns on the quarter deck where the 5-inch guns were, and that really lashed down. So the fellows went down to the butcher shop and got big knives and cut all the cables.
The guns on the ship were not ready for...
Oh no, all the ammunition was down below.
Yeah.
And we lost electricity immediately, and they had to pull the shells up like 5 stories, 5 decks where they were stored.
And so they had it by hand?
By hand, hand over hand, they pulled up those shells.
Now by that time, of course, there was a lot of damage going on. And now, were you up above at the time?
Oh yeah, right up on top.
So you had a pretty good view?
We had a pretty good view on the 8-inch guns. But in port, for an air attack, we had 50 caliber machine guns that we mounted on the forecastle. But they were water cooled, and we couldn't even get any water to put in the box. The water, to pump the water through.
Yeah,
well, it was a half an hour anyway before we could get anything going.
Yeah.
Everything was locked up. All the big locks on the ammunition lockers and the ready lockers.
Yeah. Now, what about around you? There must have been other ships that you could see. Did you see any of the ones that got hit, or?
Oh, the Arizona. We lucked out. We had damage. We had a 500-pounder land alongside, and I would say, roughly 30, 40 feet from turret number 1, where we were at that time.
The whole attack lasted, in your estimation, roughly how long?
Well, they came in waves. Like they said, it was all over in 2.5 hours.
Now, did you happen to see any defense, other than like maybe American planes? Were they able to get up in the air? Or?
I didn't see any. There were a few that got up from the Army got up, but no Navy planes ever got up.
Yeah. When that was over, now here it is, still Sunday. Let's say the middle of the day. What was happening on that ship?
Yeah, they had Army trucks lined up on the dock, loaded with rifles and ammunition for us to go on board those trucks in case the Japanese were going to invade the island. We stayed right on
You
the
stayed
ship.
right on the ship,
But the
yes, yeah.
trucks were there in case
In case you needed.
in case we would need it.
How long was that ship out of commission? I mean, you had problems even before the attack, but
For maybe a week afterwards, and we had to go back to the States. And we made it back there, and then we got refitted with 20-millimeter guns, 10 20-millimeter guns. And they were put on the ship. Plus
now was that in place of the 50 caliber?
No. They were new ones added on.
You had a chaplain on that ship, right? That became kind of famous in his own right.
Yeah, with Chaplain Foji, and he wrote, well, he coined the phrase, "Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition."
Which became a famous song. After the ship did you actually get out on that ship? Did it actually get out into the fleet after that?
Oh, sure. We made it back from the States. We went right to Australia. We took convoy to Australia. And it was at the time Darwin was being bombed daily by the Japanese.
Darwin in Australia.
And we pulled into Brisbane, Australia with a couple of big transports, you know, maybe 20,000 men. And they were glad to see us down there because all their men were taken out of Australia, to fight in North Africa, and they were left with no young men at all in Australia at the time.
You had been in the Navy before December 7th, about how long?
We had been, it was over a year. We went in 1940.
So there you were, December 7th, 1941, and all of a sudden you're in a world war. I mean, obviously it's not something you felt was coming. And that kept you in until, what, the end of the war?
No, 1946, we went in for 6 years, and we didn't get out until our enlistment was up.
Yeah, consider re-enlisting at the time?
No, I didn't. No, I had seen enough being there the day it started, and being into Japan right after.
Did you get over to Japan?
Right after
towards the end of it?
Right after they dropped the bomb in Nagasaki, we were in that area.
Yeah. Were you always on a destroyer type vehicle or?
No.
Ship, I should say.
Oh, I was on an aircraft carrier, the USS Core. That was number 13. And I was on a destroyer, and I was on a high-speed minesweeping. We were training for the initial landing on Japan at the time.
Probably that big land invasion.
Oh, yes.
That fortunately didn't have to take place.
And we were told, we automatically knew it was going to be 80% casualties.
So December 7th, 1941, and Bill Sherman was on
Was the New Orleans.
New Orleans, and he was right there when it all happened. And like most people, you didn't know it was coming, obviously, and it's certainly changed history thereafter. And that was one of the most famous dates in American history, certainly in the 20th century. So thanks for coming by, Bill.
Wow.
So many people in Berlin who have seen extensive war experiences that we're continuing that discussion now with Blinky Blinkon, who was involved in the Pacific Theater in World War II. And Blinky, actually, all we're going to talk about is one specific incident, but there's really almost half a dozen that he could talk of that would be considered major battles in the World War II annals, and he has probably more battle stars than anybody I've ever run across because of his experiences. But we're going to talk about one particular incident, and an incident is really the wrong word. It was a tremendous wartime battle that occurred at the time of Guadalcanal. And those old enough to remember that, Guadalcanal was really the turning point of the Pacific War, in the sense that it was really the first time in a major way that both on land and sea, there had been previous sea battles, but on land and sea that the American forces would turn the tide and start going on the offensive against the Japanese. And Blinky, maybe you can tell us a little bit, just backing up to get some background. Let's start with the whole thing obviously started with December 7th, 1941, when the attack occurred. Where were you? And I know there were other Berlin people with you, not necessarily with you and immediately, but in the general area. Where were you on December 7th, 1941?
On December the 7th, we had left Pearl Harbor, Jerry. We had left aboard the heavy cruiser USS Astoria. Wake and Midway, we were escorting the carrier Yorktown and one of the other carriers with planes for those islands. And we were about 150 miles due south of Pearl when the attack occurred. An interesting part, as far as I was concerned, was it was Sunday morning. We were in the so-called chow line waiting for breakfast, and destroyer with us. A little destroyer fired a 5-inch burst, and we thought that was very unusual Sunday morning. And just shortly after that, General Quarters sounded, and I had just returned back aboard ship from Fleet Fire Control School in San Diego, and I had been trained to be a stereo rangefinder enlisted spotter. And I had no battle station at that point. And for the lack of some place to go, I just run up into the after bridge, the after control area, because that's probably where I would be anyway under normal conditions. And at that point, no one knew why General Quarters was going.
Which is very unusual on a Sunday
That's
morning.
right, very much so, right. So when I got into the after bridge structure, I heard somebody holler, "Get Blinkhorn up here. He just got back from fire control school." And I thought that was unusual, but anyway, I was up in the after 8-inch gun director. So I went up in there and they said, "Get on those phones and get into that rangefinder," which I did. And it was at that point I received my personal introduction to Pearl Harbor. And the exact words were, "Pearl Harbor has been bombed. We are now at war with Japan."
There was any type of hostility that might be coming about, or was this strictly right off the...
Jerry, I'll tell you now, I want to tell you now that I can verify any statement that I may make to you, okay? I spotted a Japanese scout plane the day before Pearl Harbor in drill, and the rangefinder. Stereo rangefinder, I was capable of identifying a plane 25 miles away.
Now your job, just for people who don't understand this, was to spot targets and essentially zero them in.
And obtain the ranges. So anyway, that just passed by. But like you asked me, was there any suspected entrance into war? No, Jerry, there wasn't.
So that was a real surprise.
Yes, it was.
Now, what about your fellow Berlin? You had somebody on the ship itself, and
Arthur Pierce was assigned to the Astoria with me. We were together.
Right.
Billy Sherman was on the New Orleans. Now, all those ships were heavy cruisers.
Yes.
And Billy was in Pearl Harbor, and we had received the reports at sea. One battleship sunk, one badly damaged, and that's all we expected to see. And naturally, we were looking for them. When you enter Pearl Harbor, Ford Island is in the middle of Pearl Harbor. And when you come in, either you go to the port, which is the left-hand side, or the starboard, which is the right. Well, in our case, we always moored down beyond the battle wagons.
Jerry, as we entered Pearl, the first ship we saw was the Nevada, and she was practically setting up in a cane field. We said, "Oh, that must be the one that was badly damaged." Incidentally, Harold Wheeler from Berlin here was on the Nevada. But anyway, we continued on around, and the next ship that we come to was the California.
these are all battleships.
That is right.
These were the biggest
Battleship
ships in the fleet other than aircraft carriers.
Absolutely right. And then we said, well, that's the one that was sunk. That's not too bad. And then as we come around, we look down Battleship Row, and all just a mass of
Total devastation, yeah.
Jerry, they immediately called us to orders and announced that we had observed the destruction of the U.S. Battle fleet, that the heavy cruisers would now assume the responsibility of battle wagons, and if Japanese ships' battle wagons were met, we would attack. And knowing that they could outshoot us by about 8 miles before we could get into them, that wasn't
Strictly because of
pleasing.
firepower that
That is right.
battleships had over
See,
the heavy cruiser that you were on.
we carried 9 8-inch guns, and the battle wagons carried 12, 14, some 16-inch guns.
So they had a lot more range, a
Oh,
lot
yes.
more there's a lot that happened in between, but we're gonna fast forward, so to speak.
Right.
To, as I had mentioned earlier, the Guadalcanal came less than a year later.
Right.
The whole battle that took place then. I know there were other battles before that, but you were there in August of 1942 with other ships and even an Australian ship, I think I've heard.
Right, the Canberra.
And there was several islands in the vicinity, apparently Guadalcanal itself, which was where the Marines had landed, and Savo Island, which was nearby, right?
Right.
There's just a, we're not going to do a lot of reading, but there is a paragraph in an account here that it talks about the Astoria, which Blinky was on. There was a lot of command decisions that were made that really were not conducive to positive actions by the American forces. Forces were splitting, leaving the area before and the Japanese, we'll say for want of a better word, took advantage of a divided American fleet in essence, because they weren't all ready to meet the enemy in one place. There was a lot of miscommunication, that word wasn't passed about an attack that came. The Astoria, which Blinky was on, was at the rear of the line. In other words, there was a line of ships in the area, and you were there for what purpose at the Battle of Invasion of Guadalcanal?
Well, at that time, Jerry, the Japanese had come down. They'd gotten into New Guinea. They were getting closer to Japan, or to Australia.
Australia itself, a huge.
That is right. They were on the northern. That was the northern pincer, and the Guadalcanal area was the southern pincer. And at that time, they realized we couldn't let that part go.
Just as a little background, the Japanese at this point in time of the war had total success. In essence, nobody was stopping them. Not total success. They had suffered some losses, but they still were moving forward. Let's put it that way.
Jerry, they were superior to us in many respects. Ships, gunfire ability. They had us outmanned. We had our backs to the wall, even though we were attacking.
Well, the Pacific Fleet was in essence severely damaged at Pearl Harbor, obviously.
Right.
So there you were in August, and your mission there was to do what now?
To stop the Japs from coming down and coming into Guadalcanal. They were already there, but we went in early in the morning into darkness, and we went in on Japanese navigational light. That's how sure they were of the area. And it was a desperation move, no question about it.
On the Americans'
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
August of 42.
Yeah. And we went in, and we were laying there in the morning, sunrise, and no opposition. And Red Beach, which was where Henderson Field is the area that was where the Marines were going in.
This is Guadalcanal Island.
Right on Guadalcanal.
And there were tremendous casualties at that battle.
Oh, heavy. And then in the morning about, I'd say around 10 o'clock, we received reports of a possible air attack. A fellow up in, I believe he was an Australian, up in Bougainville. That he was up in there running a radio that the Japanese couldn't find.
An observer type.
That's right. He's given
roughly the area.
Weather and radio reports of the planes that come down toward the canal.
Yeah.
And we got word there, apparently through him, that they were coming. And it was a group of Irvings, which is a horizontal bombing plane, right? And they come in and they dropped their bombs on us, and we fired at them. And I don't think we knocked down any more than 2 or 3 of them.
Right.
They hit a transport, and that was the extent of damage there. Things were quiet throughout the day. Now that was the 7th. On the 8th, Jerry, they flew in a fleet of Bettys. Bettys were a great Japanese plane. They used it for everything. It was a good plane. Horizontal bombing, actually dive bombing, twin engine plane, skip bombing, and torpedo. And the group of planes come in on us, and some of them actually, they were skids, hit the water on the way in, and skipped the water. We got many of them, Jerry. We did. I would say probably by guess we shot down 15 or 16. Of course, they were a bigger plane to hit. They made in on us. There were hundreds of Japanese, all for some reason with sidearms.
Well, now this time they're in the water.
That was right. They shot down, right? And they were all over the area in there.
Yeah, floating around.
Right, shooting their revolvers at any sailor they could see on deck to fire at.
So they were actually in the water, firing revolvers at anything they could.
Let's see, August the 9th, we had received reports of Japanese force building up and on its way down. They've been scouting, but they had originally been scouted by Australian patrol plane. the
Japanese naval force.
right,
Yes.
the miscommunication
Yeah.
of one ship to the next. Ships right alongside of you did not have the information you had,
Yeah.
or they had information that we didn't have.
Jerry, we lost Lexington in the Coral Sea Battle, and we lost Yorktown in the Battle of Midway, and we just didn't have that many aircraft carriers left. They decided to pull them out of the area so that they wouldn't be under attack.
The Japanese naval force, they had left under the cover of darkness from where they were, but they got to your site, your place in the ocean during the darkness of the early morning.
But they were scouted coming, Jerry, during the day, and it was prearranged that we were to leave the area and meet them north of the islands at 8 o'clock in the morning.
You had an appointment to engage
That
them
is right.
the next
That is
morning,
right.
and they
Yeah.
arrived during the night before.
They arrived at 2 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
when we were getting ready to meet them at 8 o'clock.
Basically essentially undetected for the most part,
Right,
I mean, in
right.
terms of being ready.
See, we never had radar then, Jerry, that they developed soon afterwards, okay? What little radar we had would work for 5 minutes and then just go out completely. Gunnery radar almost.
They were hitting American ships without even a response initially, at first.
The Chicago was engaged with them north, right where we were. And we knew nothing about it. The first indication that we knew they were in there, as far as the Astoria was concerned, was there were flares dropped to our starboard side. And when you were anticipating trouble, some kind, all guns, everything trained to where the shells were, where the star shells were, illuminating, in this case, illuminating the transports. In Guadalcanal Beach, there, right. And there was nothing out there, and that's when they had fired the shells from our port side, over the top of us, and we were silhouetted.
Yeah.
They had us, we couldn't see them. All these cruisers carried planes, Fort Scout planes, and which we launched off catapults, and that's the first thing they hit on all four. The Quincy and Vincennes just blew in flames.
These were sister ships, right?
Sister ships, right. And they were hit with torpedoes too, and they were out of action fast. And we weren't, and because we were alive, and we were on fire. I happened to be up in the director. We were on Z, your battle station, okay? And then you go into condition 2, which 4 hours on, 4 hours off.
I see.
I happened to be on. That's where I was. I was up in my battle station right there.
Which was up in a very high position on the ship.
We opened fire, and we were hit immediately. My rangefinder reticules, I ranged with reticules, they're diamond set of lights, and it's conceiving depth in space, and I'll do it this way. When I put my reticules out over the target, which would be your arm, I'd indicate I was on target, and then I'd back them off or take them beyond, bring them back. When I'm on that target, I press again, given a series of my ranges.
Yeah.
Well, at nighttime, these reticules are lit up, and all of a sudden I lost my reticules, and we called the plotting room. Is the battery all right on the reticule lights?
Yeah.
And they said, no, yes, the trouble must be up there. So with that, we went looking for them. I got out of the center of the rangefinder. Now, mind you, my rangefinder was 18 feet long, and I was in the middle of it. I got out to look for trouble, and 5 feet of my rangefinder was missing. It had blown off completely. It was about, I'd say, 8 feet in diameter. We had a 5-inch shell go through where I had been standing. Just the armor-piercing shell.
You guys were looking for well, you weren't getting a lighted
That's right,
reticules.
that's right.
And the shell went right through where you just left.
That's right. There was a searchlight beam. They put searchlights on us. And there was a light beam coming through that hole.
Wow.
The flames come up and things were getting real hot. And we got down, ducked to get into an area way as best we could. Jerry, we didn't know it, but they abandoned the director. Another fellow, Joe Horn and myself, didn't know that they left the director. Just the director crew, whoever the officer in charge up there says, let's get out of here, we can't do anything here.
But you were still up there.
Right.
In this hot place.
So they left, and Joe and I, not knowing that when things quieted down, and no one around, and now it's dark, everything is black. That fire, that ladder that we
went down from where you were.
Down to the next step was, I wouldn't say red hot, but it was hot.
Mhm.
We took off our shoes, we took our socks, put them on for gloves, put our shoes back on, and those ladders are probably only about 7 or 8 rungs, you know,
Uh-huh.
and we come down off of those things as
You can imagine, yeah.
But the ladders going down that we normally would go down were burnt completely, just wrecked, demolished.
Mhm.
There was no way we could get down out of there.
Into,
But what had happened, the group of editors apparently had found a rope, and they had thrown it over and come down on top of turret 3. And when we found that, we went over the top and slid down, as you'll see, going down through,
yeah.
down to the turret, and then down off the turret into the after structure. They had left by then, the Japanese had left. Our 3-inch turn, incidentally. The Japs were intending to turn around and come back in at us again, and then apparently get at the Marines and transports.
Yeah.
And our turn 3 fired 3-gun salvo, and it took out the bridge of the lead Japanese ship that the admiral was on.
Uh-huh.
And I think he was injured on that shot. We just lost all.
You had
our
lost all
pressure.
your capability to fight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. We were desperate to do anything.
Essentially dead in the water, it sounds
Jerry,
like.
I'll tell you, a case like that, why your medics, some of those kids were killed. We had 2 doctors aboard, a surgeon and a doctor. The surgeon was killed. This doctor automatically became a surgeon. Some of us went in the water to be with the rafts, and then they lowered the injured men down in the rafts because it was
in other words, too many people for that raft, and so the injured were in the raft, and people like yourself were
held on to
actually
the outside.
on the outside in the water.
Right.
Yeah.
We had 35 men in our 20-man life raft. We didn't feel we were going to be picked up because the Japanese subs got in. They had contacts, and they had to drop depth charges. All these guys in the water around.
The American ships were depth charges.
That's
against the
right.
Japanese
That's
subs,
right.
yeah.
And whenever you'd see a destroyer throw a what we call tin can off, a depth charge, we were in the water until about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, next afternoon. And we didn't think we were going to be picked up, so we started for Florida Island, diagonally across from, in the chain, right, diagonally across from Guadalcanal.
Right.
And we were close to the breakers when, I'll never forget it, we heard this one voice scream, and hauling, and we backed down, and it was an officer in a 1-man life raft. He, thinking afterwards, he must have been shot down in an airplane.
Yeah.
To be in a
By
1-man life
himself,
raft,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
And he's hauling, get away from there, we have no troops on there, that's a Japanese island.
No, you were heading towards Florida Island, which was occupied by the Japanese forces. Yeah.
We would have been one of 2 things, either captives or would have been shot.
Yeah.
That was what we, and this was with a fellow rake in Holden that joined the Navy at the same time we did. He floated all night all alone in life jacket. And in those days, they were the old K-Park life jackets.
Which only had a certain life to
Right,
them,
right.
then
And
the
he
sun.
was,
Yeah.
all night long, we could hear him hollering.
Yeah.
And finally, when it got daylight, we were able to find him and get him onto our raft. All that was up above the water was his mouth.
He was gradually
That is
sinking.
right, just
Yeah.
waiting him down, waiting him down.
Right.
And we got him, I think, right that afternoon, around 4:35. The destroyer Wilson come around and picked our life raft up. All right. And then they transferred us to the transport. Hunter Leggett took us to New Caledonia, New Caledonia, and they transferred us to the Henderson. From the Henderson, we went to Pearl Harbor, and from Pearl Harbor back to the States for 30 days leave and reassignment.
Initially here, Harry Miller, who has an interesting story to tell. And Harry was in World War II, and as you can see by the hat, if you can pick that up, he was on the USS Harridan, and which was DD 585, which means, what was that, a destroyer? Destroyer. And the Philippine invasion by the American forces had already started.
We were coming up the Surigao Straits into the Sulu Sea, about 400 miles inside enemy territory.
And, right.
We're getting ready, gonna take Mindoro, and that was a jumping off spot to Subic Bay, and then we're getting to go for reinvasion of the main island of the Philippines.
I will return,
was-
that had occurred 2 months
That
before
happened in
that.
October that occurred.
Lady
To
Gulf,
Logan
right.
Gulf.
And this was a follow-up, and you were going
Yeah.
to the main island now of the
Main
Philippines.
island now.
So this is 2 months after the initial invasion, and you were part of the, what you said, mentioned the Ghost
The
Fleet.
Ghost Fleet. Look, the radar didn't pick these guys up. There was 7 of them. They come down the side of the mountain. We were in tall mountains around it. So.
Yeah, yeah.
And the lookout spotted them, and
But they were Japanese airplanes.
yeah, 7 Jap Zeros.
Uh-huh.
And I think there was a Betty or 2 in there. But anyhow,
Betty, was that a bomber? Or
Wow,
something?
yeah, twin engine bomber.
Right, yeah.
Anyhow, they opened. Ready guns opened fire on. That's when we first found out they were coming in, because they sounded GQ at the same time. which
So
is
you
general
guys
force.
were out in the front of the fleet?
Yes,
Yeah.
Anyhow, we opened fire on them. We got a couple of them. The one that got us was heading for the bridge, but for some reason he veered off, and he just swept the bridge with his wing. Yeah, I was on gun 45, which is the uppermost 40 millimeter. I was a talker. I gave the range, and when I commenced it,
I
I stopped
see.
firing.
It was sort of a team effort.
Oh, yeah, we couldn't shoot at this plane with our gun because it was coming in from fall. When we opened fire, we'd blow the stack down ourselves, so he was coming in that way.
Yeah, okay.
We got a couple of them, or 3 of them, and this one here, for some reason, like I said, he was aiming for the bridge. The bridge guys thought he was coming in there. He did come in on a starboard side, and wiped the whole side out with his wing, and that spun him into the stack, which
Into
blew
the
the
stack.
stack out when it exploded. When he exploded, he blew the boilers in the number 1 fire room, which sent the explosion airborne. Otherwise, we would have
Went up
split right
in
in
the
the
air.
middle. see?
Right. When they came in, were they like diving, or were they more or less lower altitude?
Low altitude, just above the water. 'Cause
Yeah.
the radar wasn't any good down there.
There were casualties on the ship?
14 dead,
With
and we
the
had
immediate
around 60 some odd wounded.
assistance.
We were dead in the water for about, which was an interesting place to be dead in because we was in a minefield.
Uh-huh,
Drifters, eh?
yeah,
Anyhow, just as the Twigs came alongside, that's that other ship in the picture there,
okay.
and took off some of the casualties. A couple of them died. And just as they were getting the fires under control, these 2 Bettys came in on a bombing run.
These Japanese bombers.
Japanese bombers,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know where the heck they come from, but P-38 come in,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of ours.
That's one of the American planes,
And he
yeah.
got bodies.
No kidding.
Yeah, and he just
And
come down, waggled his wings, and took off. Well,
Wow.
look at fleet.
pretty good shooting by that, because he probably had more maneuver, but that was a fighter plane, I
Oh
think.
yeah, that was a twin fuselage.
Versus bombers,
Yeah,
so he did his job very well.
yeah. We got the broken pipes repaired and the boilers relit. And the after fire up on the front fire room, forward fire room was destroyed.
Uh-huh.
And the engine room, forward engine room was destroyed. So
Right.
we couldn't use it, so.
Mm-hmm.
We finally got underway about, I don't know, 63 minutes an hour, 10 minutes later, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Under our own power, but
Yeah.
the fleet don't wait for you now, that's gone.
They
We're
said
all
we're
alone.
leaving.
We're
and
all
they got-
alone,
Yeah.
right, you're on your own now.
Oh, they left no other ships
No,
then?
nobody with us. Anyhow, we got underway, and that was an interesting story because we were doing 22 knots on 1 screw the next morning. We wanted to get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
And then in the morning, we had reversed course. We were heading back to Lady. When the daylight come on, everybody was on edge because daylight's the worst time for
Yeah.
enemy planes and all that kind
They're
of
real
fancy
vulnerable.
stuff.
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
Captain come on and says, we're supposed to be picked up, I forget the name of the ship now, it was another can.
Mm-hmm.
And he was gonna pick us up and escort us to Lady, see?
Yeah.
So the next morning, we can hear the ship saying that they have a bogey on the screen coming up the channel at 22 knots.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be the wounded chicken that's coming up because it's going too fast.
Wounded chicken. You mean
That
the-
was us.
That was you, yeah.
They said, but they're gonna wait till daylight so they get a visual identification, just in case, before they open fire on it. They were tracking us, see?
I see.
So when the daylight come up, there was this can here, that was constrained on us, you know.
This would have been the friendly fire we hear about, you know.
Right,
yeah.
right. Went back to Lady Gulf.
Lady Gulf.
The anchorage there.
this now Unky Underwood, who saw the war, and we've talked to several people from a different perspective. Unky was in the armored part of the, I guess, the 8th Army during World War II in the 40s.
I went in the Army in 1941. Right after the Pearl Harbor, I went and enlisted in the Air Corps.
Which was then the Army Air Corps, not the Air Force as it is now.
Everything went by alphabetical order. My name being Underwood, they had a bunch going to South Carolina in the Army, and they didn't have enough personnel, so they just tore down the 3 names, Underwood and Zeke and somebody else, and slapped it over and said, "You're in there, go down there." I said, "Well, I wanted to go in the Air Corps." And they said, "Well, you see your chaplain when you get there."
Yeah, well,
I never did. I went to Camp Cross, South Carolina. From there, I took a couple of mechanical aptitude tests after my basic training, and I ended up at Fort Knox, Kentucky. There, we were forming cadres for all the outfits. We had finally ended up with our own down in Louisiana, Camp Polk, Louisiana. The old outfit, 8th Armored Division.
8th, that was a new
division.
just being formed at that time.
At that time.
8th Armored.
There was infantry, tanks, reconnaissance. Trained for about, I'd say a couple months. We ended up training in Texas. When it was all over, we got our orders to move out. I'd say around August in '44.
Okay.
And we ended up in Fort Dix, and from Fort Dix we shipped out to England. The Tidworth Barracks in Tidworth, England. It's the old Bengal Lancer quarters. Yeah, we went over on what was known as the USS Ocean Mail. That was the name of the ship. We were there at Thanksgiving, and right after Thanksgiving was when the bulge broke through.
That was the famous Battle of the Bulge, late 1944, in the early winter.
We were waiting for more equipment, but they said they couldn't wait any longer. We had to go over as backup support. We left Southampton and went over to Le Havre, France.
By boat.
By boat. Down to Pont-à-Mousson, Metz and Nancy, where we first engaged our enemy. It's quite a trip.
Yeah.
It was quite a trip. And it was slippery. Our tanks had to go off the road to get traction.
Because of the ice and so forth.
Ice and snow.
Where are these towns? Are these like central France?
Yeah, about central France. Down in southern and central, I would say. German Tiger tank.
Yeah.
And it was sitting down loading ammunition in. We called back for our howitzers, which were 105s. We had 3 of them there.
Yeah.
And so one of them come up and he drove up over the ridge of the road, so that usually howitzers fire indirect. But this one here fired point blank, and that was the end of that Tiger tank. And we went from there, we took the convoy, we went all the way up to Holland. There was what known as the Ruhr Pocket.
Ruhr, that's the famous industrial
area.
Yeah, of Germany. Yeah.
And there was another outfit coming from the south, and it was forming a pincer movement. We were to take over all the factories.
In other words, cut that off so the Germans couldn't...
We were supposed to go down to Czechoslovakia from there. On our way down, we did capture an airfield, but it was at the time that our president died, President Roosevelt. And one of the German officers that we caught said, "What are you going to do now? Your president died." We said, "That doesn't matter. We got 100 guys can take his place."
Yeah.
And they were amazed at us being able to say that.
Because of the supreme leader that they had, so to speak, So you went across Germany, actually, into Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, we went up over the Harz Mountains, down into Czechoslovakia, into the city of Goslar.
What was the mission to go there?
To meet the Russians. Then, while we were in the city, we had to go through the whole town and police for any weapons and any persons that were able to be in the service at the time. While we were in Czechoslovakia, the war ended, so I did get a furlough down to the Riviera. Went down, had a furlough. On my return trip back, my outfit had disappeared. So they said, "Well, we need a first sergeant. You can act as first sergeant here if you want." I said, "No, I want to get to my outfit." "Well, we just got a report in. You're supposed to go up into Luxembourg, up into Holland, and you are going to go into the 80th Amphib outfit because you're going to train to go to Japan." When we got up there and we were training, that was one of the worst scares I think I had in the whole war. Because I was there 2 nights and they were having a night problem with an amphib. And we went out in the ocean with the amphib, and when we got out there, the motor conked out. Our radio wouldn't work, and we started drifting out with the tide. Tub or something come along and grabbed us and towed us in. Our whole outfit had got back from the maneuver early evening, and we got in at 6 o'clock in the morning. The saddest part of it all is the man that stood up for me when I got married in Louisiana, my best man, he got killed while we were in action.
One of the famous personalities in World War II, and actually in military history of the United States, was George Patton, General George Patton. Of course, there's been movies made about him, and there were several books that were written about him. He was a controversial figure. And we are fortunate to have with us now somebody who actually was right up close with General Patton during World War II, Tony Sandini. Now, when did you actually go in the Army?
1943,
So-
April of 43.
Of course, you went to basic training.
Yes. So Camp Miller, Georgia. After basic training, I went up to Fort Meade, Maryland, Camp Meade, Maryland.
Yeah.
And from Camp Meade, Maryland, I went up to Camp Miles Standish to be sent overseas.
So you ended up in Camp Miles Standish,
Right.
which is, there's a Miles Standish forest in southeastern Mass, and that must have been in that area, right?
Yes, right there.
1943, so the war was going hot and heavy. In Italy at that time, we still had not
Yes.
invaded
Yes.
France. That came next in 1944.
We went into the camp, and 3 of my buddies went into this barracks to get settled down. I spotted a bunk up that was facing outside. There's a window there, and I was able to see everything. And my buddies were hussing around, said, "No, you're not going to take that bunk."
Yeah,
And they began to jostle me on the mattress. Over I went,
yeah.
hurt my knee again. So they had to cart me off to the hospital. A couple days later, the boys left. After I got out of the hospital, I was put in a barracks where the replacements were waiting to be assigned. I was put on duty making pies, actually. One of the days I was sleeping in my bunk, it was daytime because I had to work in the evenings.
Sure.
And I overheard this colonel looking for somebody that could speak Italian and understood Italian. He says, "Okay," he says, "in the morning you'll be assigned." Wait a minute. I says, "Well, to what kind of an outfit?" He said, "The military police." And I said, "No way." I looked down on the military police being an infantryman.
Yeah.
So he said, "No, a combat military policeman." So I was a little bit excited because I thought maybe I'd go to Italy and probably be behind the lines and with the partisans and so. But I certainly didn't want to be a forward observer. That's what they were looking for at the time. Next morning, I got up and went off, and I joined this 503rd Military Police Battalion. I didn't know who I was assigned to, what army I was assigned to, or anything of that
Yeah.
sort.
Right.
Boston,
Yeah.
right, boarded the ship, and thinking that I was going to go somewhere so that I would go to Italy, and lo and behold, I landed in Scotland, got on a train, and they brought me down to a place called Macclesfield, and then from Macclesfield we went out into the country and went to a place called Piova, Lower Piova. In the evening, in the morning, I woke up and there were these barracks, wire enclosure, and this beautiful building that was a manor. I found out that General George S. Patton was there, and I was assigned as one of his palace guards. I would open doors and go with him to the front and then come back. And
Yeah. Really, a lot of people didn't know he was back in England, where he was, right?
nobody, no,
He's-
we didn't know.
Yeah.
But there he was, getting ready for the invasion.
Yeah.
The Germans didn't know where he was. The Americans, the American people back home didn't know where he was.
So they were working on their
Yes.
invasion plans.
While I was there guarding, I was walking up and down this the road there in front of the barracks, and General Patton took a walk each day, and he saw me walking and it was raining cats and dogs, and my feet were all muddy and so forth. And the general, and when he come by, of course, I saluted him, and he said, "Soldier," he says, "where are your galoshes?" I said, "Sir, we were not issued any galoshes." A couple days later, we were given boots. Contrary to public opinion, his troops, he loved them. And he was very strict, however. That was my first encounter with him. But we had gone to a place called Nancy, France. General Patton was, the Third Army was then put on in a holding position at that time. So he had taken over another manor. One evening I was guarding there, and each night I'd look out towards a place called Metz. That was a kind of a stronghold. I'd hear the planes and I would see the lights, and they were shelling in that area. But I thought nothing of it because this was night after night. But this particular night, I heard the shells dropping and so forth, but they were becoming louder and louder. Finally, I began to become a little bit frightened. They were hitting the city itself of Nancy.
German artillery was.
Yes. I found out later that we were being shelled by these railroad guns. The railroad guns would be in a kind of a tunnel, the railroad tunnel, and they would shoot out. They'd go 20 miles. General Patton had been trying to find those guns. The shells were dropping very close. One of them landed on a house 100 feet away from General Patton. I was knocked down the force of it. My rifle went up in the air, and the barrel of the rifle went into the ground. And about 10 or 15 feet away, a big hole was in the iron fence. I got up shaken, and I looked at the house, and all the windows were blown in, and I said, "My God, the general." I lit a cigarette because I was shaking, and I immediately went into the manor. And lo and behold, there at the top of the stairs was the general, and he was smoking this cigar, and I had the cigarette, and then I realized that, hey, I'm not supposed to smoke while I'm guarding. And I said, "Sir, are you all right?" He says, "Of course I'm all right." He says, "Soldier," he says, "you might not smoke cigarettes." He says, "You should smoke a man's smoke, and that's the cigar." I never saw somebody so cool and collected. Then I said, "Sir, the Frenchman's house across the street was hit by a shell, and I imagine that there must be somebody in the cellar." Immediately bolted down the stairs with a cigar, and he says, "Follow me, soldier." We went out of the manor in the front door, and that was all blown out. It was glass, and it was all out. And we went out, we opened the door, and went right out. So I immediately followed him, and he turned around to me, and he says, "Soldier," he says, "where do you think you're living, in a barn?" He says, "Close the door."
The frame was still there.
The frame was still there, so I went back and closed the door. Well, we went across the street. He immediately started to, by his own hand, started removing bricks and stones and so forth. French people, yes. He says, "Okay," he said, "I want you to go down to the headquarters," which was about 6 miles away, "get his medical doctor." This is the kind of a man he was in a personal way. He's pictured as, bigger than life, which he was. He carried 2 guns and all that.
Near the invasion, when it occurred in June of '44, you landed in spit polishers and.
That's right. And we landed with our helmets all shellacked. We had neckties on, creased pants, shine shoes.
The Germans probably figured you were insurance salesman or something.
Well, at least the First Army, the invading forces were still there on the beach.
and certainly Vietnam is one of the more recent episodes in our history that's burned in everybody's memory, and we have John Wilson. John was in the Marine Corps, but he was in Vietnam from September 1969 through September 1970.
Well, I was probably about 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers northwest of July, and probably about another 25 or 26 kilometers southwest of Da Nang, out in an area they called Quai Son Valley, on a base called FSB, or Fire Support Base Ross, with the essentially the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. I was with the 2nd and 3rd Battalion, but mostly the operations consisted of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. That was basically an artillery support where they stuck it out in the middle of nowhere so that the infantry units could move around the base where they would get more artillery range out there. Essentially what it was is the infantry was used for bait to draw the enemy in where they could hit them with the artillery and inflict the most damage. We had planes off the carriers off the South China Sea. They're usually on station for so many hours at a time. You had your Slicks or your Cobra gunships or your Huey gunships.
Those are the helicopter
helicopters. And I went to school for a year out in San Diego for what they call Telecommunications maintenance technician, which is essentially I learned to repair long-distance telephone and teletype microwave systems, microwave bands. I was stationed at a division, but I was sent out to assist or support the 7th Marine Regiment in the communications for fire support, for the artillery, emergency resupply, and logistical support. Usually at any one time you probably had about 250 Marines there. We had Kilo Company of the 11th Regiment. They consisted of self-propelled 8 inches and self-propelled 175s millimeters, 105 millimeters, and 81 mortars.
Let's say an Army unit or whoever was out away from that base and they encountered, would they call back and ask for support?
Yeah, they would call back and ask for support, and part of my job was if they needed resupply or more ammunition, or if they needed additional fire support from other bases. That's part of my advanced job, was supporting, was a link to the regimental base. Mine was mostly for administrative type purposes and non-emergency type purposes. The emergency purposes would usually be the VHF radios and stuff.
Now you had mentioned microwave. Was that the...
That was the parabolic antennas, which stood up in the air, and it was quite convenient for the NVA, North Vietnamese Army. My antennas were great aiming stakes.
They could zero in on
They
those
could
things.
zero in. They plotted everything off of my antenna, so I was not the most popular person on base. We had the bunkers, consisted of bunkers around the base, and then you had your usual, what they called LPs, or listening posts out front. The particular incident was January 6th, 1970. There was 3 of us that were living in a Colonel CP tent, probably about 15 feet by maybe 10 feet. We had our van on the other end of it, and we entered and exited through the side.
I see.
And so we lived right there in our van. It was Dennis Lips from Hamilton, Ohio. It was his night on radio watch. And he woke me up about 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:15 in the morning. He said that he was too tired to continue. I turned the radio on, and I was listening to the Armed Forces Vietnam radio network, and they said the time on deck is 01:18 in the morning, and here's a tune from, it's popular in the States, and they played like 4 bars of the midnight theme from the Midnight Cowboy, and when the first mortar started to hit. As we found out later, it was the 37th NVA Artillery Regiment, which was essentially a 122 millimeter type rocket type unit. And what they had done is they had sent approximately 70 or 80 sappers, which were people that specialized in cutting wires and sending satchel charges. And we killed 39 and captured 1 the next day. Apparently they started the mortar barrage prematurely because the sappers had not set their charges as of yet. So
North Vietnamese.
North Vietnamese, and that's it. So the mortars came in. Of course, everybody woke up and the sound of incoming and stuff, and we're all running to our bunkers. And as we were running out, there they were. They were running, the NVA, the North Vietnamese were running through the barracks.
They had penetrated your whole area.
Penetrated the barrier.
Yeah.
They were running through the tents, and there was literally Marines on this side and Marines on that side firing at the guys running through their tents, throwing Just throwing the satchel charges. They were probably plastic explosives, so probably bags, probably 12 inches by 12 inches. The 81s, which were, I was on top of the hill, which is probably maybe about 20, 30 meters high. And to my right was the 81 millimeter mortar pits. The gun chief on the cruiser literally had the handset down there calling for firing instructions. And with the concertina wire maybe 10 or 15 feet away, actually firing at the NVA. He would fire and kill an NVA as he tried to throw the charge.
Wires. Now these were these, what you call sappers.
Sappers. And all this while everybody's running around, you still had the mortars coming in on you. And what we called RPGs, or rocket-propelled grenades. One thing that I will say about the Marine Corps, they took heavy casualties, but gee, they were well-trained. Everybody knew where to go. After the element surprise, we finally secured the base probably about 8:30 in the morning. But I would say probably we had control of it probably from approximately 2:30 in the morning. And it was just a matter of flushing the last people. A lot of sniper rounds or sporadic fire. The official casualties that are listed in the Vietnamese almanac were 12. And we had, I think, 20 wounded or something like that. The next day, I remember I counted at least 20 body bags of Marines myself. So I'm not sure how they reported it, but the official count was 12. They're all listed on panel 14 West, lines 3 through 7 down in the wall in Washington, D.C. We had killed 39 on actual in the base and captured 1. And the next day we went out for a sweep, we found 70 fresh graves. The official count is 39. Couldn't tell exactly that those 70 were from our operation or from some other operation. The 1st Battalion, 7th Marines had just come out from regimental level, and there was some incidents out there of accidental discharges and stuff like that, so they decided to take all the ammunition away from everybody, except for people that were on bunker duty. And they gave 2 rounds of magazines and a couple of grenades. Well, fortunately, a lot of us had lost a lot of our ammunition that we were able to find that night. That was one of the problems that they had, that they were trying to run it as a rear echelon type base. Did result in some changes. Everybody carried full arms and weapons after that.